Welcome to the Logic and Quantitative Reasoning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Hamadi. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University and one of the designers of this course. Wherever you are, if you're driving or doing dishes or laundry or unwinding after a long day at work, I hope you're having a great day. If you've taken my advice from last week about practicing every day, you're probably listening to this podcast early on in the third week. As you start working your way through the material for this week, I'd like for you to contemplate the idea of being truth functional. And that's a style of logic that depends on statements being either true or false. So first, let's consider what it means for a statement to be true. And one way to do this is to think about the difference between something that's true and something that's a fact. So when I talk to my students in the classroom, oftentimes I'll bring this up by asking them what they think a fact is. And I'll often get a variety of answers. Some people will focus on the idea that, a fact is something that's proven, or a fact is something that has evidence, or a fact is something that maybe could be proven if we took the time to actually do it. So a thing that wouldn't be a fact would be something that we couldn't know anything about. Right? So a fact might be something known. That would mean that something that's true is merely a fact that maybe hasn't been proven yet. And anyway, they go around in circles with this. And I think it's because right now in normal English, we don't have a really clear way of talking about what a fact is. In the context of logic, a fact is merely what is. A fact is the way reality actually is. So a statement can be made about reality, but the statement isn't reality. Reality is reality. So when we think about facts within the context of logic, facts are merely the way reality truly is by itself. And then we can try to describe that reality. And our descriptions will be better and worse. A good description of reality we would call true, and a bad description of reality, one that's misleading or omits important information, or merely gets it wrong. Those kinds of statements we call false because they don't accurately reflect reality. So the reality is messy and complicated. The statements that we use to talk about reality shouldn't be as messy and complicated. So if you think about the difference between, say, the world, the way it is, and then what you might see when you look into a mirror, the image created by the mirror would be a statement. But the image created by the mirror is not the same as, another way to say this, the image in the mirror is a reflection of reality. And you can have a true mirror, one that accurately depicts or accurately creates the image of reality, or you can have a false mirror. And we've all seen false mirrors before, right? Ones that make things look larger than they really are or smaller than they really are, or those ones that you see in carnivals that are curved, and so it might make your legs look extremely long or make you look like you're, extremely skinny or something. But those are false mirrors, but they were trying to reflect reality as it is. So when we're thinking about logic, we obviously can't be dealing with facts, because facts are just the world. And some of those facts we don't have access to anymore. So it's a fact about whether or not the United States put people on the moon. It either happened or it didn't. But it's not like we can go back and watch it happen all over again, because that fact simply isn't accessible to us. It's part of the past. All we have is the present. But we can make statements about facts, and those statements are things that we can use and work with. So in the case of fact versus true, right? Facts are the world. Statements can be true or false. So within the realm of logic, truth is a property of statements. It's not a property of the world. The world just is. but statements can be true. Now, statements within truth functional logic are only true or false. They obey what's called the law of excluded middle. And this is one that was formulated by Aristotle originally, and it just means that statements are either true or false. Now, this kind of black and white thinking would be very inappropriate if we were talking about facts. Like, we don't say someone is either good or bad, or say a political movement is only just or unjust. Like that's unreasonable. But for statements, they are either true or false. They're either all the way correct, and then that means that they reflect reality as it is, or they're all the way false, and they in some way leave out portions of reality that are relevant. Now, this is kind of a strange thing to do, since we don't normally treat everything as either, black or white, true or false, on or off. And the world has a lot of messy stuff in it. One of the classic examples of the messiness of the world is what we call true vagueness, or vagueness in reality. So I'll give you an example and see what you all think about this. This is something to maybe contemplate. All right, how many drops of rain does it take for the grass to grow? So think about this for a minute. All right, you've got the green lawn. You want the grass to grow. You want the grass to be healthy. And so there needs to be some rain, some water droplets. Well, how many water droplets does it take? And whatever answer you give that will give you a green lawn, you know that that is not the correct answer. So let's say we say it's 1.5 million droplets. I don't know how many droplets of water that would be for your lawn. But let's say it's 1.5 million droplets. Well, what if you removed one of the droplets? Okay, at 1.5 million, you get a green lawn. It's beautiful and green. But at 1,499,999, is it still green? The answer would be, well, yeah, one droplet isn't going to make the difference. What if we start removing, instead of one, what if we remove 10? Again, probably wouldn't make a difference. Or 100, or 1,000, or 10,000. And you'd probably still have a green lawn. In fact, there isn't a single dividing line where you get one less and the lawn goes from green to brown. It just doesn't happen that way. Same thing with lots of other stuff in nature. But this one is, I think, since it's so numerical, it's pretty easy to wrap your head around. Whatever the number is, you could have done with one less. Here's another one where we think about numerical issues being vague in reality. So like many of you probably, I'm trying to keep my weight under control. And unlike back in the day where I could just eat a dozen donuts and then follow that up with a large pizza and then a giant 2-liter bottle of Coke, and then the next day I'm just the same as I was. Can't do that anymore. So I have to be cognizant of how much I'm eating. Well, think about the number of calories and say, well, okay, I need a certain number of calories just to stay healthy. Let's say the number is 1,800. Okay, just throwing out a number here. So let's say it's 1,800 calories to stay healthy. Well, what if I have one day 1,750? 50 calories less. Will I still be healthy? Yeah. In fact, there's a big gray zone of health that maybe 1,850, 1,900, maybe even 2,000 is okay, or even down to 1,700 or 1,600 would be okay too. Now, the problem comes when we go off of that gray zone and we know there's something wrong at that point. So I say, okay, if 1.5 million drops of water makes the grass green and I drop it down to 500,000, well, I start to be worried. Or if I raise it up to, say, 4 million, it's like, well, I'm going to just drown this grass. Same thing with calories. If I say, okay, if I know 1,800 is healthy, but I drop it down to 1,000, well, I know that's wrong. Or if I bring it all the way up to 3,000, pretty sure that's wrong too. But there isn't a single calorie number that is the correct number in terms of health, because that's just not the way bodies work. Same thing with the drops of water on the grass. There isn't a single, just one number that is the correct number for drops of water. it's all over the place. Reality has baked in it a kind of vagueness about a lot of things. So it might seem like unfair, really, to have logic require our statements to be either true or false. And I'd like to defend that for just a minute and see what you all think about this idea. Okay, before the break, we were talking about the way logic has to do with something a little weird that we don't normally do when we talk about reality, where things, our statements, our building blocks of logic have to be either true or false, no middle ground. And I said that I would defend this idea a little bit. Well, here's something to keep in mind. When we're studying logic, we're not studying the world. We're studying ideas. And ideas need to be connected to each other. Well, what are those connections? In reality, things are connected to each other in all sorts of different ways, but ideas need to be connected in a more restricted, specific sense. So an idea might be connected to another idea in that they're both true, right? So you say, well, idea A is true and idea B is true. So the connection between those ideas is this and connection. Or you might say that the two ideas are connected and that if one of them's true, then the other one's true too. So, for example, and we talked about this, you probably looked at it in your in chapter 1 of the textbook, but if you've got something like a person is a bachelor, right, then it's also true that they're unmarried. You say, that's an interesting connection between these two ideas. If one of them's true, then the other one's true. As long as that first one is true, the other one will be true too. Or you might have a relation of ideas where the two of them, one of them's true. Maybe it's the first one, maybe it's the second one. Either A is true or B is true. Maybe they're both true, but they can't both be false. One of them's true. That's a connection between ideas. But you notice with each of these connections, we're saying true or false. This one true, that one true. This one false, that one false. That kind of thing. The connections between ideas are connections of true and false. So even though reality might have all sorts of different kinds of connections and vaguenesses and things that are undefined or can't be defined, that human beings, when we're talking about them, are mixtures of all sorts of different stuff. But when we're talking about our statements are related to each other in these relations of true and false, these connections of true and false. So because of that, our logic has to reflect that. And so when we're thinking about statements, the kinds of things that logic deals with as its building blocks, we think of them as being true or false. Now, obviously, the English language, and any language really, is much more complicated than that, because there's lots of things that we can say that aren't statements about the world, that aren't the kinds of things that can be true or false. So, for example, I might ask a question. If I said, what's the weather like today? You're not going to point at it and say, true. No, that's a question. There's no true or false about the question. You have to, it's an interrogative. I need an answer. Same thing with an imperative or a command, right? If I tell my kids, hey, let's eat dinner tonight at McDonald's. I think that'd be fun. Do you guys want to eat at McDonald's? Let's do it. Or get your shoes on. And they're like, false. Get your shoes on is not. You can't say false to that. You might say, I'm not going to do it, or I don't want to, or McDonald's is, we had McDonald's yesterday or something. But it's not, if I'm giving a command, you can't say true or false in response to the command. That doesn't make any sense. There's exclamations, right? HBU, we've got the Huskies. If someone jumped up in the stands after we scored a point and shouted out, yeah, go Huskies, that's not something that's true or false. Go Huskies is not true or false. But if I said something like, the Huskies are the best team, Well, now that's something that could be true or false. And so you've got things that could be true, or candidates for being true or false, and then you've got all the other things in language that we use words to do. And only some of the things that we use language for are descriptions of reality, and those are the things that can be true or false. They're true if they accurately depict reality, the way a true mirror accurately shows visually what's in front of it. And they're false if they in some way distort reality. So here's some things that you can start thinking about just as a mental discipline, as a way of life when you're talking about your statements. True statements, I'm going to give two things about true statements. One, true statements are iterative. What that means is when you start with a statement that it could be true or false, often you'll have to go back and revise it multiple times in order to better reflect reality. So you start out with a candidate statement, and then you bring up some objections to it. Maybe they're objections that you think of. Maybe they're objections that you hear in the course of a conversation with a friend, or maybe as a result of that idea being attacked by an enemy. And you go back and you think about it, and then you revise the statement, making it closer to the truth, and you go through the process again. So sometimes within philosophy, we might start an investigation into a particular statement and then re-examine the statement over and over and over again, correcting small mistakes, adding details, making sure that it's exactly right, and then at the end, we might actually have something that's true. So a true statement is something that is iterative. The second characteristic of true statements is that they leave slanted language behind. There's so many words in the English language that we use to tip the scales in favor of our own preferences. Here's a fun example. Let's say we've got someone who they tend to stick to their guns. They don't change their mind easily. Well, there's a couple different ways we could describe them. We could say that person is steadfast or reliable, or we could say that they're skeptical, or we could say that they're stubborn, or we could say that they're pig-headed. There's all sorts of different ways to describe the same behavior, and depending on the word that I use, we get a completely different feeling about whether or not that person's behavior is okay. So if I said, "Oh yeah, my daughter, she's very persistent," it's like, "Oh wow, persistent. That's great. That's a good thing. That's a yes." I'm saying nice things about my daughter. Or I could, for the exact same behavior, say, "My daughter is very stubborn." It's like, "Oh, stubborn. That's not good." Right? Stubborn sounds like she's being unreasonable or difficult to work with, or opposing me just because she likes being oppositional. But it's the same behavior. Right? So in order for a true statement to really do its job, we need to remove that slanted language. Because what that language does is it imports extra things into the statement that don't belong there. So if I wanted to say, "My daughter tends to stick to her principles," that's positive. But really what I'm saying is, she doesn't change her mind easily, and that's good. If I say my daughter's stubborn, what I'm really saying is, my daughter doesn't change her mind easily, and that's bad. But again, in both cases, the word choice is giving the "and that's good" or "and that's bad." It's kind of an interesting thing from the standpoint of when this was recorded. A lot of journalism is now directly saying in the title of the story, and here's why that's a good thing, or and here's why that's a bad thing, or here's why that's not okay. So I think that's actually a nice bit of transparency. Instead of just using words that have a particular feeling or flavor, they're going ahead and telling you, and here's what we think is good, or and here's what we think is bad. And it's okay if you want to have a statement that includes, and this behavior is bad, or and this behavior is good. That's fine. But it needs to be explicitly part of the statement, not something that is snuck in using particular word choices. I hope that's given you something interesting to think about today. Until next time, remember, practice, 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 and talk to you again next week.